I never thought I'd see my darkest secrets displayed in the window of every bookstore in the city. But there it was, and my life, wrapped in a glossy cover with the title Broken Wings: A Sister's Journey by Vanessa Caldwell. My sister, my own blood, the person who'd stolen my diary and turned my pain into her profit. The worst part? She'd changed just enough details to make it fiction, but I knew, and soon everyone else would too. My name is Meredith, though in my sister's best-selling novel, I'm Melody, the troubled younger sister who nearly destroyed the family with her lies and manipulations. Funny how she flipped our roles completely. I was 28 when this nightmare began, working as a pediatric nurse in Chicago, trying to build a life far from the chaos of my childhood. Vanessa was 31, a struggling writer who'd been rejected by every publisher in New York until she found my diary. I discovered her betrayal on a rainy Tuesday morning. My best friend Simone called me at 6 a.m., her voice shaking with excitement and confusion. She said she'd been reading this new book everyone was talking about, and it sounded exactly like the stories I'd told her about my family. At first I laughed it off, then she started reading passages out loud. My blood turned to ice. Those were my words, my memories, my trauma. I called in sick to work and drove straight to Barnes & Noble. There it was, displayed prominently in the new releases section. The cover showed two sisters holding hands, one pulling the other toward the light. Such a beautiful lie. I bought a copy with trembling hands, sat in my car, and read for 3 hours straight. She'd taken everything. The night our father left, the months our mother spent in a psychiatric facility, my struggle with anxiety, and the therapy sessions that saved my life. But in Vanessa's version, she was the hero who held the family together while I spiraled into self-destruction. She painted me as manipulative, attention-seeking, even violent. The truth was so twisted I could barely recognize it. The real story began 15 years ago. Our parents' marriage was falling apart, and as the younger daughter, I became the family scapegoat. Every fight, every financial problem, every disappointment, somehow it all traced back to me. Vanessa, the golden child with perfect grades and perfect behavior, watched it all happen. Never once did she defend me. Never once did she acknowledge the truth. I started keeping a diary when I was 13. It was my therapist's suggestion, a way to process the emotional abuse that no one else seemed to see. I wrote everything, the cruel words, the gaslighting, the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering why I wasn't good enough. That diary saved my sanity. It was proof that I wasn't crazy, that these things really happened. I kept writing through high school, through college, through therapy. 5 leather-bound journals filled with my journey from broken child to healing adult. I'd hidden them in my childhood bedroom, in a box marked old school projects. I thought they were safe there. Last year, our mother called to say she was selling the house. Vanessa volunteered to help clean out our old rooms. She must have found the journals then. She never said a word to me, just took them, read them, and rewrote my life to suit her narrative. The book exploded. Within a month, Broken Wings hit the New York Times bestseller list. Vanessa was everywhere. Morning shows, podcasts, book tours. She spoke eloquently about the pain of watching her younger sister's mental health struggles, about the strength it took to save our family. Interviewers praised her bravery. Readers sent messages thanking her for sharing such a raw, honest story. I watched interview after interview, each one making me sicker than the last. She'd memorized my pain so well she could cry in cue when discussing Melody's darkest moments. The suicide attempt that never happened, the drug addiction I never had, the violent outbursts that existed only in her imagination. But woven through these lies were enough true details that I knew she'd studied my diaries like a textbook. The worst interview was with Diane Sawyer. Vanessa sat there in a designer dress I knew she'd bought with my stolen story, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She talked about forgiveness, about how she still loved her troubled sister despite everything. The audience gave her a standing ovation. I threw my remote at the TV. Then I called her. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and false. "Hey Mary, did you see the interview? Wasn't it amazing?" I couldn't speak for several seconds. When I finally found my voice, it came out as a whisper. "You stole my diaries." Silence. Then, in a harder tone, "I don't know what you're talking about." I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. For weeks, I considered my options. I could sue her, but she'd been clever. The book was marketed as fiction, names and places changed just enough to provide legal cover. I could go public with the truth, but who would believe me? I was nobody. She was the best-selling author of the year. Then I realized something. Vanessa had stolen my past, but she couldn't steal my present, and she certainly couldn't control my future. I started writing, not a diary this time, but a manuscript, a sequel to her story told from Melody's perspective. The real perspective. I wrote with a fury I'd never felt before, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. Every lie she'd told, I countered with truth. Every twisted scene, I rewrote with accuracy. But I didn't stop there. I included things that weren't in my diaries, things I'd never written down because they were too painful, too raw. The night I caught our father with another woman, and Vanessa convinced me to keep quiet. The time she planted jewelry in my room and let our mother believe I was a thief. The college recommendation letter she sabotaged. Years of subtle cruelties that had shaped both our lives. But here's where I got really clever. I didn't just write about the past, I wrote about the present too, about discovering the theft, about watching her profit from my pain, about the rage that burned in my chest every time I saw her face on another magazine cover. I wrote it all as Melody, the character she'd created, the troubled sister finding her voice at last. It took me 3 months to finish, 3 months of late nights and early mornings, of tears and determination. When it was done, I had something explosive, something that would change everything. I didn't go to a regular publisher. Instead, I found Mr. Hartley, the same editor who'd rejected Vanessa's work 5 times before she stole mine. He remembered her well. Apparently, she'd been quite nasty when he'd passed on her last manuscript. When I explained what I had, his eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "We need to be careful about this," he said after reading my manuscript in one sitting. "But my God, this is powerful," I smiled. "I want to publish it under a pseudonym at first, let it build momentum naturally. Then, when the time is right, I'll reveal who I really am." He agreed immediately. We both knew this would be publishing gold. Shattered Truth, Melody's story, hit shelves 6 months after our meeting. I'd insisted on timing it perfectly, right when Vanessa was launching her book tour for the paperback edition of Broken Wings. The marketing was subtle but effective. The other side of the story that captivated millions. What if everything you believed was a lie? Melody breaks her silence at last. Readers were intrigued. Sales were steady at first, then began to climb. Book clubs that had discussed Broken Wings picked up Shattered Truth out of curiosity. The discussions that followed were illuminating. People began to notice things. Inconsistencies in Vanessa's narrative that suddenly made sense when viewed through Melody's eyes. The way certain scenes felt more authentic, more lived in. Details that rang true in a way fiction rarely does. Online forums exploded with theories. Could this be real? Was Melody actually out there somewhere? Was this brilliant metafiction or something more? Vanessa, meanwhile, was getting nervous. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd tried to find out who was behind the book. Her publisher was asking questions. Readers at her events were bringing up Shattered Truth, wanting to know her thoughts. She gave a disastrous interview where she stammered through questions about the new book, calling it opportunistic and clearly fictional. But her discomfort was obvious. People started paying closer attention. Then came the review that changed everything. A prominent literary critic named Sarah Winters wrote a detailed analysis comparing both books. She'd noticed something others had missed, certain phrases in Shattered Truth that appeared to be direct quotes from Broken Wings, but with crucial context added that completely changed their meaning. She concluded that either this was the most elaborate literary hoax in recent memory, or Melody was real in telling her truth. The review went viral. Melody is Real started trending. Readers began dissecting both books with forensic intensity. That's when I made my move. I scheduled an interview with the same podcast that had first featured Vanessa. But I didn't reveal my identity beforehand. I was just MC Truth, the mysterious author of Shattered Truth. The host was practically vibrating with excitement as we began recording. "So, the question everyone wants to know, are you really Melody?" I took a deep breath. "My name is Meredith Caldwell. Vanessa is my sister. And yes, I am the real Melody." Everything in her book happened, just not the way she told it. The silence that followed felt like eternity. Then the questions came flooding out. I answered them all, calmly and thoroughly. I'd brought receipts, our therapy records, photos, even pages from my original diaries that Vanessa had somehow missed. The interview lasted 3 hours, but I saved the biggest revelation for last. "There's something else," I said as we were wrapping up. "Something that's not in either book. Vanessa didn't just steal my diaries, she stole something else too. Something that explains why she was so desperate for success that she'd betray her own sister." I pulled out a folder I'd been saving for 8 months. Inside were emails between Vanessa and a married professor from her MFA program. An affair that had ended badly when his wife found out. The man had influence in publishing circles, and after the affair ended, he'd made sure doors closed in Vanessa's face. Her writing career was effectively over before it began. She was desperate, I continued. She needed a story that would be too big for him to block. So she took mine. The professor's name is David Chen. His wife, Linda Chen, is now my literary agent. She was very interested to learn where Vanessa got her sudden inspiration. The podcast episode dropped at midnight on a Thursday. By morning, it was the #1 trending topic across all social media platforms. Vanessa's publisher released a terse statement saying they were investigating the allegations. Bookstores began pulling Broken Wings from their displays. But I wasn't done. Phase 2 of my plan was already in motion. You see, while everyone was focused on the scandal, I'd been quietly working on something else. A third book. This one wasn't about the past or the present, just it was about the future. About healing, forgiveness, and the complex reality of family relationships that can't be reduced to hero and villain narratives. I called it Beyond the Wings. In it, I wrote about my journey to forgiveness, not for Vanessa's sake, but for mine. I wrote about the therapy that helped me understand how our toxic family dynamic had shaped us both. About how Vanessa, despite being the golden child, had her own traumas and pressures I'd never fully understood. About how we were both victims of a system that pitted sisters against each other instead of helping us support one another. I didn't excuse what she did. The theft, the lies, the profiting from my pain, all of that was unforgivable, but I tried to understand it. To see the desperate woman behind the betrayal. The sister who was so broken she could only build herself up by tearing me down. The book ended with an invitation, a letter to Vanessa published for the world to see. I told her I was willing to meet, to talk, to try to find some path forward. Not to the relationship we never had, but maybe to something new, something honest. I didn't know if she'd accept. Part of me hoped she wouldn't. The anger was easier than the alternative. Beyond the Wings released 6 months after the podcast explosion. By then, Vanessa had retreated from public life entirely. Broken Wings had been reclassified as inspired by true events rather than fiction, with a disclaimer about the controversial nature of its creation. Her advance for a second book had been rescinded. The literary world had moved on to other scandals, but readers hadn't forgotten. Beyond the Wings debuted at #1, staying there for 12 weeks. More importantly, it started conversations about family trauma, about the ethics of telling someone else's story, about the complicated nature of truth and memory. I did the book tour Vanessa never could. Not because I enjoyed the spotlight, I didn't, but because I wanted to control my own narrative for once. At every event, someone would ask if Vanessa and I had reconciled. Not yet, I would answer, but I'm hopeful. It was mostly true. Hope was all I had left when it came to my sister. The letter came on a Tuesday, exactly 1 year after I'd first discovered her book. It was handwritten, 5 pages of her careful script. She didn't apologize exactly, but she acknowledged, she admitted. She explained in her own broken way why she'd done it. She was drowning, she wrote, had been for years. My success in building a life away from our family felt like judgment of her failure to do the same. My diaries showed her a truth she'd never wanted to see, that she'd been complicit in my pain, that the golden child had tarnished edges, so she rewrote it all, made herself the hero she'd always believed she was. But living that lie had hollowed her out. The success felt empty because it wasn't real. Every interview, every fan letter, every royalty check reminded her of what she'd done. She'd stolen my pain, but in doing so, she'd multiplied her own. She wanted to meet, to talk, to maybe find a way forward. I held that letter for hours, reading and rereading, trying to feel something other than exhaustion. The anger had burned so bright for so long, but now it was just embers. What remained was sadness. For her, for me, for the sisters we could have been in a different life. I wrote back. 1 line. Same cafe where we used to meet for lunch, back when we still pretended to like each other. Thursday, 2 p.m. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in the corner booth we'd claimed as teenagers. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a sweater I remembered from college. When she saw me, her face did something complicated, relief and terror and hope all at once. I sat down across from her. We stared at each other for a long moment, 2 strangers who shared DNA and nothing else. Then she said the words I'd waited 2 years to hear. "I'm sorry, Mary. I'm so fucking sorry." And finally, I believed her. We talked for 4 hours, not about the books or the scandal or the money. We talked about our childhood, comparing memories like detectives piecing together a crime scene. We discovered things, moments where we'd each protected the other without realizing it, small kindnesses forgotten in the wash of larger cruelties. We weren't the sisters we'd written ourselves to be. We were just two damaged people trying to survive a damaging situation. I didn't forgive her that day. Forgiveness would take time, therapy, and more conversations than either of us could imagine. But I did something maybe more important. I saw her, really saw her, not the villain of my story or the hero of hers, but the complex, flawed, broken person she actually was. My sister, nothing more, nothing less. The media went crazy when someone snapped a photo of us leaving the cafe together. Speculation ran wild about collaborations, tell-all books, movie deals. We ignored it all. Instead, we started meeting every week. Slowly, carefully, we began building something new. Not a relationship based on our past, but one grounded in who we were becoming. Two women who'd hurt each other terribly, trying to find grace. Vanessa started writing again. Not about me or our family, but fiction. Real fiction. Stories that came from her imagination rather than stolen diaries. They weren't bestsellers, but they were hers. I kept writing too. Essays about healing, about complex trauma, about the messy reality of family relationships that resist easy narratives. Sometimes Vanessa would read them before publication, offering notes that made them stronger. We were learning to tell our own stories without erasing each other. The anniversary of Broken Wings came and went. Then another. The scandal faded into publishing history. A cautionary tale told at writing conferences and ethics panels. But for us, it was ongoing. Every day we chose to keep trying, keep talking, keep building. Last month, Vanessa called with news. She was getting married, a quiet ceremony, family only. Would I come? I said yes. Not because we'd healed completely. We hadn't. Not because I'd forgotten. I never would. But because she was my sister, and despite everything, that still meant something. The wedding was small, beautiful in its simplicity. As I watched her exchange vows, I thought about stories. How we tell them, how we revise them, how we live them. Vanessa had stolen my story once, twisted it into something unrecognizable, but in the end I'd reclaimed it. More than that, I transformed it into something neither of us could have imagined. During the reception, she pulled me aside. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for everything." I nodded. We both knew what she meant. Thank you for not destroying me when you could have. Thank you for choosing grace over revenge. Thank you for seeing me as more than my worst mistake. But I'd gotten something too. By refusing to let her betrayal define me, by choosing to write my own ending, I'd found strength I never knew I had. The broken wings she'd written about were real. We'd both had them. But we'd learned to fly anyway, separately and now, carefully together. That night, I went home and opened a new document. Another book was forming, but this one felt different. It wasn't about pain or betrayal or even forgiveness. It was about after. About what happens when the drama ends and life continues. About two sisters learning to know each other for the first time. I typed the first line, "The story you know is over. This is what came next." And for the first time in years, I smiled as I wrote. The story was mine again. Ours maybe, but this time we'd tell it true. The world had watched our destruction play out in bestseller lists and trending hashtags. But our reconstruction? That was private, personal, and infinitely more powerful. Book by book, conversation by conversation, we were writing a new narrative. I closed my laptop and looked out the window. Somewhere across the city, my sister was starting her married life. We'd talk on Thursday, our standing coffee date that had become sacred. We'd share our weeks, our struggles, our small victories. We'd continue the slow work of becoming sisters again. It wasn't the story either of us had planned. It was better. It was real. And that, I'd learned, was the only kind of story worth telling.